Okay, good morning, everyone. This is another installment of the Saturday mornings Clear Mountain Monastery YouTube, Instagram, sutta discussion and Dharma Talk. My name is Ajahn Kovilo, and today we're going to continue talking about the Sabbasava Sutta, which is the second discourse of the Majjhima Nikaya. And we've been going over, there are 7 different ways of abandoning which come up in this discourse. And these are abandoning by seeing, abandoning by restraining, abandoning by using, abandoning by enduring, abandoning by avoiding, abandoning by destroying, and abandoning by developing. And the specific subject for today's talk will be abandoning by restraining. So it's good to see people tuning in. And maybe we'll just begin the talk in the traditional manner, paying respects to the Buddha in the Pali language. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Yeah, so abandoning by restraint, abandoning by restraining. The English term restraint or restraining gets a bad rap. Many Americans, when you think about restraint, the first thing you think about is not beautiful mind states, but it's like a restraining order. You get a restraining order for your boyfriend or your girlfriend who's just being a total jerk, or like a straitjacket, something to restrain your arms and legs. It's something which a police officer or a mental health care worker will bind you with without your consent. But in a Buddhist context, the word samvara has a very different and very wholesome implications, very wholesome meanings. There's a Dhammapada discourse, sutta, Dhammapada stanza, where the Buddha says restraint by the eye, restraint by the ear, restraint by the nose, restraint by the tongue, restraint by the body, restraint in bodily actions, restraint in verbal actions, restraint in mental actions, restraint in everything will lead in a good direction. So restraint. Be thinking about this and considering what it means for your practice as we go along. The format for this morning, similar to other Saturday mornings, will be we'll have, maybe I'll share for about half an hour till 10:30 if you're on the West Coast, or 1:30 if you're on the East Coast. And then we'll have about 15 minutes for question and answers. And you can feel free to put questions into the chat box on YouTube as you'd like. So to start off this talk on restraint, again, not a very popular concept in English, I thought I'd tell a story. And this is a story which I'm kind of modernizing from a very well-known discourse which the Buddha gave, which is in the Samyutta Nikaya, and kind of modernized it for the current age. But it gives a good representation, a very visual and all-around kind of picture of what restraint means and the possibilities of restraint in a Buddhist context. So this story begins once upon a time. There was a Gandhava or a Gandharva. This is a Pali term for a heavenly minstrel. So a deva, basically, who plays good music. And you can think maybe Bob Dylan, but shinier. Yeah. So there was once a heavenly minstrel, a Gandhava, and this Gandhava was a big fan of reality TV shows. And, he was getting along pretty well, just enjoying watching these TV shows. But then he thought, why should I just rejoice in seeing these other shows that the other heavenly minstrels have created? Why don't I make a reality show myself? So he thought about it for a while and got a great idea. And to begin his idea, he got a television crew together, of course, got all the lighting ready, and he went to the enchanted forest. And he set about by doing 2 magic tricks to start with. First, he put all of the animals in the forest, all of the creatures in the forest, he put them to sleep. So all the creatures in the enchanted forest have gone to sleep. His next magic trick was to make all of the animals the same size. So all the squirrels got bigger, all of the gorillas got slightly smaller, etc., till they're all about equal weight. Yeah. And then he turned on the cameras and let all of the animals wake up from their sleep, which he had put them into. And then he puts them back to sleep because forgot one step. While they're still asleep, he takes 6 different ropes and gets 6 different animals who are still asleep, and he ties one rope to each animal's tail. He got one large jackal, he got one large bird, he got one large dog, he got one large snake, he got one large monkey, and he got one large, or actually slightly diminutive, slightly small alligator, and got them all together while they're sleeping, puts them in a big meadow, open meadow, and ties one end of each rope to their tails, and then he ties all of the opposite ends of these 6 strands together. So basically, we've got one big knot in the middle, and we've got these 6 different animals who are kind of, going off in different directions, while they're still asleep. And then this is when the heavenly Gandharva turns on the video cameras and sees what happens. What's going to happen? We've got these 6 animals who live in different places. What are they going to do? And that is the plot line for, this is all just, you see this in the rolling kind of introduction, the introduction to each episode. And each episode, we see what happens when each one of these different animals gains to preeminence, when they really want to get back to their home. So in episode 1, we have this big alligator, which pulls the whole group. So when the alligator pulls back to the water, all of the other animals, because they're not as keen to get back to their homes, get pulled along with them. So the alligator is pulling his rope, and all of the other animals are not as strong, so they're just pulled along behind the alligator. And you watch the shenanigans that happen as the alligator is doing that. Then in subsequent episodes, we've got these different large animals who are gaining eminence in this kind of pull. And we forgot to name the name of the show. It is called the Great Animalian Pull-Off. Yeah, the Great Animalian Pull-Off. And each episode, so we've seen the alligator get the high ground and drag all the other animals back to the water. Then we get the monkey on the next episode, and he, really wants to get back to the jungle, pulls all the animals to the forest. Then in other episodes, the bird wins, and he kind of strong enough because he's huge, takes all the animals, flies up into the air, and all the other animals are kind of dangling there beneath him. Similarly with the jackal, pulls the animals into the charnel ground, the dog pulls the animals into the village, and the snake pulls the animals into a anthole. So that was season 1. And the last episode, the heavenly Gandharva, the last clip of the last season, he says, remember this, everyone. Remember this scene, and it will serve for your long-term welfare and happiness. End of season 1. So we've just seen all of these different animals kind of pulling and to some extent, going at crossways from each other. Season 2, comes on, the Gandharva has a different idea. How about, rather than having these animals pull each other, the great Animalian pull off, rather than pull each other, how about if I just get a big stake and put it in the ground in the middle of the meadow? So he does that, and he puts all the animals back to sleep and takes the end of the rope, undoes the big knot that was in the middle, tying them together, and then ties all of those different ends of the string to a central post. So now, rather than the animals being tied to one another, they're tied to this central post. And then turns on the cameras, and what's going to happen? And as you might expect, each of these animals looks around, they look back and say, oh God, this is what's going on. I just want to get back to the water. I want to get up to the sky. I want to get to the village, etc. And so they run their different directions. But as they get to the end of their rope, they're suddenly pulled back and they can't go anywhere. They struggle for a while, but the heavenly minstrel has tied the knots well, and there's no way they're going to be able to pull back to their village or back to their homeland. So yeah, that's every episode is just the same thing in this season 2. Basically, each animal trying to get back to its home, the jackal trying to get to the charnel ground, the bird trying to fly up in the air, the dog trying to get to the village, the snake trying to get to the anthole, the monkey trying to get to the forest, and the big old alligator trying to get to the water. But none of them are successful, and eventually, maybe in episode 5 or so, they just give up. They've been pulling long enough, and then they just lie next to the post. And again, the last episode, and this is the last season because it actually wasn't that an exciting show, but the last episode, the Gandharva again looks at the screen, looks at the camera and says, remember this, and this will be for your long-term welfare and happiness. So, what is the moral of this story? Each of these animals is like a different one of our senses, and sense restraint is what can train and can tame these different animals. So if we don't have a central pillar, like the animals had in season 2, then each of our different senses just runs its own direction. We see something beautiful with the eye, then we just run off to try to get it. You can feel this if you, I haven't done this personally, but say you want to binge whatever your favorite streaming show is, and then after 14 hours or so, you could probably feel your eyes are just sore from so much watching. This is like your mind has been going out through the eyes for the past 14 hours in a really intense kind of way. So we can think of, the Buddha didn't, in his simile, didn't relate each animal. He did use these same animals, but didn't actually specify like which animal relates to each sense. But I think one can do that and have the memory more readily sticking in one's mind. So we can think of the eyes, the eye sense, the eyes going out to forms as being like a jackal, basically constantly on the lookout for whatever. He sees some bones over there, he sees some meat over here, and he's just constantly on the lookout for getting, just a little hit of whatever it is. And that's like the eyes. Similarly, the ears, we can equate the ears or the ear sense to maybe like the bird. So there's this etherealness to the ear factor. You're hearing through space, and just like the bird, we hear something, we hear some beautiful music in the background, and we cock our ear in that direction. What is that? What is that beautiful sound? Or we hear, some cacophony, some unbeautiful sound, and we just kind of, cringe and pull away. And this is similar to the bird, just pulling all the other animals along. You've got the mind going out through the ears, and at that moment, when this is according to Buddhist psychology and the Buddhist Abhidhamma, every mind moment there can be only one object, and that object can either be a sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, or mental thought, mental phenomenon. So that's what it means by the animals pulling. So I can't Okay, so continuing with the description and the explanation of these different similes. So we've got the ears like a bird, and then we have the nose, which is like the dog. The dog is constantly trying to get back to the village. And similarly, we smell something in the kitchen, we smell something wafting in from the kitchen, and we love it, especially if it's, if it's something stir-fried maybe, or you're just constantly trying to get closer to that, or you smell something from the you smell something from the toilet, from the bathroom, and you cringe and want to get away from it. Similarly with the tongue or with tastes. And this is maybe like the snake, like the tongue of the snake. The tongue is our how we go out through the mouth. So basically, everyone has experienced this. When you're at a wonderful restaurant, then you look at the menu, and it's almost as if your tongue has already come out and you're started going in that direction. And the mind or the body is like a monkey. We've got this apish, this simian body of ours, and basically it's just trying to get soft and agreeable touches, potaba, and avoid the astringent and uncomfortable and painful sensations. And similarly, the mind, like a huge alligator. Again, this is usually, if you haven't done magic and made all the animals the same size, usually the alligator will always win. And this is the mind. Basically, it goes off whatever object, whatever thought it wants to think about, and it pulls all the other mental factors along with it. So that's the image. And that's the image for when there's no restraint. Yeah. But what is the image for restraint? Is that we've got this pillar. And what is the pillar? The Buddha goes on to describe mindfulness of the body, kaya gata sati. And when you've got mindfulness of the body well established, made your vehicle, set up right, then when you see a sight with your eyes, you hear something with your ears, then there's a corresponding physical sensation, and you can honestly correct with the body. So on a very kind of gross level, you can see this with people who spent too much time looking at their computer. Basically, you just get more and more drawn into the screen. You're just more and more drawn in, and your posture is just slumping further and further. But when you notice that actual, moving out through the eyes and into the screen, then you can actually reestablish your mindfulness with the body and reestablish your posture, straighten yourself up. And so that's one very practical way to work with restraint. And the question then comes, what's the point of restraint, or the guiding framework that we get in the Sabbasava Sutta, Majjhima number 2, is we are restraining for the purpose of avoiding those unarisen defilements, or unarisen, basically bad moods, unarisen, unhelpful, unbeautiful mental qualities which have not yet arisen. So it's good to, or it can be helpful to look at the Pali word for restraint and to break it down a little bit. So as I mentioned, the Pali word for restraint is samvara. Yeah, sang means with, and vara is actually a restraint or a tie, something which ties you up. And a related word is nivarana. Nivarana. And people who know a little bit of Pali, you know that nivara means the hindrances. So the 5 hindrances they talk about in meditation: sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry, and doubt. Those are nivarana, and that has that same vara. So ni is down, and vara, again, is a tie or something which wraps you up. And in the case of the nivarana, in the case of the hindrances, these are things which pull you down. These are things which hinder and obstruct your growth in Dhamma, your movement upward, in a sense. Whereas the samvara those things which kind of tie us, they tie us in a healthy way. So it can be thought of as like a splint. Yeah. So if you've broken your leg or you've broken a finger, the doctors will put some kind of solid brace behind your finger and then tie it up, wrap it up, so that you don't further hurt your finger by bending it too much when it's still broken. So that's the restraint. That's the tying up. That's helpful and that's unwholesome. That is samvara, or it's like, yeah, that which ties us up, or that which yokes us, that which keeps us related to and attached to and remembering in a wholesome sense the things we want to remember, the good habits that we want to inculcate and practice. We're kind of, that's like maybe the people probably don't do it anymore, but in the old days, actually I never did it, I don't think, but you say tie a string around your finger if you want to remember something. So that's maybe a similar instance is, yeah, we tie this thing around our finger because we want to have the mindfulness to remember, oh yeah, I have to go to the store, or oh yeah, I've got this string around my finger, that reminds me I don't want to smoke cigarettes. Yeah, something like that. Remembering your good habits and then having the wherewithal to stick with them. So that's samvara and nivarana. And yeah, learning about it or thinking about it in this way, we can see the benefit of keeping to our good habits. And again, this Sabbasava Sutta frames it in this way. So with regards to each of the sense bases, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, or mind, the discourse says, here a practitioner, reflecting wisely, abides with the eye faculty restrained, while taints, that is asava, vexation and fever might arise in one who abides with the eye faculty unrestrained. There are no taints, vexation, or fever in one who abides with the eye faculty restrained. So what does this look like in regards to each of the senses? Why would you want to pull back or maybe move forward with regards to what your eyes are doing? Like, isn't it okay? Isn't like the spiritual path, isn't, Buddhism, isn't it all about freedom? What are you talking about? Like restraining or like tying yourself up? That's not what we're all about. Nibbana is about unfettering yourself, being unattached. And while that's true in a sense, you have to get to a place where you're mentally healthy enough to realize that or to know that. And restraint is one of our tools that can help us see that more clearly. When we're expending less energy running out through the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, then the body and the mind can settle and become concentrated and become tranquil and peaceful. So that's our goal. That's why we're practicing restraint, is for peace and for happiness, a higher happiness that comes than that which comes from constantly running out through the eye, going to, just being totally unrestrained, with these would be the mind door or the eye door or the ear door, just going whatever website I want to go to, whatever, I'll just go. It doesn't matter. And not every website is something that you really want to be exposing your eyes to, I might argue. I think many people would see the truth in that. So restraint of the eye is a useful thing. This is something which you can practice. If you were to go to any website, I know there are some pretty gory websites out there. And by practicing restraint of the eye, you don't have to experience the fear or the loathing or the kind of disgustingness, these unhelpful emotions which might arise if you were to just say, oh, I'm just going to go to these gory sites because it meets my fancy and why not? And fair enough. The Buddha does over and over, all over the place, say, practitioners, avoid sensual pleasures, kama, avoid sensual pleasures. avoid sensual pleasures, avoid sensual pleasures. But in our discussion of restraint, it's very important to remember how the Buddha defined kama, how the Buddha restrained sensual pleasures. And he does this in an Anguttara discourse in the Sixes. And he says, practitioners, they are not sensual pleasures, the beautiful things of the world. A person's sensual pleasure is lustful intention. The beautiful things remain just as they are in the world, but a wise person removes desire for them. So it's not the case that these gory websites or these pornographic websites or whatever the thing that your eye is chasing or pulling away from, or whatever your ear, nose, tongue, body, or mind are moving towards or moving away from, it's not the object that is evil. Yeah, money isn't the root of all evil in a Buddhist context. Women aren't the root of all evil in a Buddhist context. Men aren't the root of all evil in a Buddhist context. Sex isn't the root of all evil in a Buddhist context. For monastics, we don't have sex, but the object isn't the problem. It is the lust and desire, which is internally born in relation to those external things. So yeah, why would you want to have restraint of the eye? Maybe a practical example is, say you're out maybe pre-COVID time or post-COVID, if that ever happens, and you've been invited to a work dinner and your boss is there and they've got their husband or their wife there, and their husband or their wife is just fine. They are very, very good looking. Yeah. And although the eye does, since the time of the Buddha and before, and all the way up to the present day, and probably for the foreseeable future, human eyes just like to look at beautiful things. And yeah, if you were just to follow that and just stare up, just kind of look up your boss's husband or wife, just look them up and down, that's not going to be for your long-term welfare and happiness. That's just one instance where you might want to have practiced restraint of the eyes beforehand. Yeah, and you can think of analogies with all of the other senses, like tastes. Yeah, this is a big realm. So anytime you're on diet, what you're trying to do, basically all diets are a practice of sense restraint, and hopefully you're doing it in an intelligent way if you want the diet to last. So basically, you don't want to let your tongue go out, or your mind through the tongue, or ideas about tastes go anywhere they want if you're trying to lose weight. Because if you do, you're just going to eat all that junk that you don't want to eat. So this is another area where restraint is very useful, is crucial. And the mind, actually, is the key realm to all of these, because really it's not the eye that's a problem, just as it's not the sight, sound, smells, taste, and touch. Similarly, it's not the eyeball or the ear or the nose or the tongue or the body or the mind which is the problem. So it's the internal craving and aversion towards these things, and that's where the mind door comes in. So this is the huge alligator, the crocodile, which really just pulls our whole sensorium, our experience of the senses, in whichever direction it wants. And really, this is what we're training in meditation very directly. So yeah, things to remember are this: planting our stake in the middle of the meadow, which is mindfulness of the body. And yeah, using this principle in the lab, in the training room. This is the woodshed, basically, where we go to practice, is in our formal meditation practice. Because the more we're able to restrain the mind when we're doing formal sitting or walking meditation, then the stronger that capacity for mental restraint will be when we go out into the world. So yeah, that's some thoughts specifically about how to restrain the external senses, but also it can be good for, yeah, and essential to practice informal meditation. So we can go to questions now. Okay, very good question. So the first question comes from a cat. And that question is, why would we restrain the intellect faculty? Very good question. Very good question. This is maybe one of the driving questions for the secular Buddhist movement. I'd mentioned before that I was able to attend a retreat with Stephen Batchelor, kind of the foremost of secular Buddhist movement. And their underlying thrust or underlying investigative model is just one of questioning. You need to question everything. You need to question the Buddha's teaching. You need to question everything. And this can be great. You can really learn a lot about yourself. You can learn a lot about Buddhist communities, learn a lot about the religion, if you do that. But there does come a point when it does become helpful to nurture the faith faculty. Yeah, we'll never have an answer to every question. There are certain questions which the Buddha just said to leave aside, like, is the world eternal or not eternal? Is the world finite or infinite? Is the soul the same as the body? Is the body the same as the soul? Does a Buddha exist after death? Do they not exist after death? The Buddha said this type of question, you just don't need to entertain because there's no end to it. Similarly, thoughts about what was I in the past? How did I exist in the past? There's a whole string of these also in the Sabbasava Sutta, in the section on restraining by seeing, which the Buddha pointed to as questions which just aren't worth asking. So there's a good quote, which is, if you are a skeptic, and fair enough, really you need to take your skepticism to the next level and be skeptical of your skepticism, or doubt your doubt. The intellect, the mind, can be a beautiful thing if it's working with us, but it can also be to our detriment. I think there's some existence of different psychological literature on rating the veracity or the truthfulness of people's perceptions for people who are not depressed and people who are depressed. And there's some evidence that people who are depressed actually are seeing things more in line with how they actually are. Yeah. So they're seeing perhaps a larger range of truth than are people who are not depressed. But that said, do we all want to be depressed? No. There are certain truths which, are not really worth focusing on because they don't go in the direction that we want to go, which in a Buddhist context is peace and happiness. If you are wanting to maintain your job, then aiming your intellect at all of your boss's faults might not be a good idea. If you are wanting to maintain your marriage, then you might not want to be excessively and obsessing over all of your partner's the ways that they're cooking is subpar, this type of thing. So there are many intellectual virtues which are praiseworthy: intellectual humility, intellectual tenacity, thoroughgoingness, openness. But it's good to have bounds with that when you see it's not going in a good direction. Good question. Thank you. Okay, another question says, oh, darn, do I need real corpses or corpse meditation? No, no, you don't. So what this is asking about, I didn't mention it specifically, but this is pointing to one method of what's called asubha bhavana. Bhavana is meditation or cultivation, and asubha is focusing on that which is unbeautiful. So in the Satipatthana Sutta, the main discourse of the Buddha on foundations of mindfulness, establishings of mindfulness, the Buddha does teach, like actually for advanced practitioners or for people who it's useful for, is to either look at directly if you are in a country that has charnel grounds or hospitals that are amenable to you coming in and looking at corpses, then like Thailand, then that can be a useful practice for counteracting lust. Yeah. So if you're looking to, if your kind of libido is getting a bit out of control, then this is one practice which you can engage in. And again, the question, do I need to have real corpses, or do I need to practice this asubha or unbeautiful meditation? And the answer is, it's not, it doesn't make sense to talk about, do I need to? Are you compelled? There's no compelling in Buddhism, really. The Buddha never compelled anyone to do anything. Basically, he gives a path for people and says, here's a goal, and to get to that goal, you have to do X, Y, Z. And if you do X, Y, Z, then you'll reach that goal. So, the Buddha didn't say you need to do X, Y, Z, but if you want to get to the goal, then these are the steps. So no one is compelled to practice corpse meditation, but yeah, you might find it helpful if you're open to that. If you're not open to that, just use your mind restraint to pretend that I never brought this up. Another question. So does focusing on appropriate sense restraint decrease the sense of self that develops through the chain of dependent arising with sense contact? Yeah, it does. It's a good question, and yeah, that's how it happens. So for people who maybe are not so familiar with dependent arising, this is basically the Buddha's elaboration. Oftentimes he'll list 12 factors, which are his understanding of how causality leads to repeated suffering. And the links which are being asked about here are about sense contact, phassa. And so phassa leads to, it can lead to, contact leads to all right, back. Thanks for everyone's restraint and patience. Yeah, so talking about how sense restraint, it actually, where it jumps in there less than at the object of sense contact, phassa, and more at the link between feeling and craving, vedana and tanha. So we've got this feeling, which are, it can be a feeling through the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, or mind. There are 6 types of feeling, and it's when we have a feeling connected with the eye and we go towards it. That's where you start having craving. But we can have that. See, we see that beautiful, our boss's husband. We say, oh, he's so fine. Okay, we see that first thought. We see that they're very beautiful. But where the intelligence faculty or sense restraint can come in and say, okay, I saw that, but I don't want to go in that direction. So I'm not going to create craving from this feeling, which has been associated with the I. So yeah, good point. That's where, that's how sense restraint fits into dependent origination. Next question. I appreciated what you said about those who are depressed seeing things clearly. How do we balance a strong sense of samsara and a need to practice with not succumbing to depression? Yeah, great question. There is, right now I'm staying with Bhikkhu Bodhi at Chuang Monastery in New York, and have been coming across a teaching which he has given, which are basically about a vertical versus horizontal appreciation of the Four Noble Truths. So vertical is when we look at the Four Noble Truths, we look at dukkha in terms of our own inner experience, the internal sense of pain and discomfort and dissatisfaction that we feel. The horizontal is when we can appreciate it in other people, in the world, in animals, in beings, in humans of any type. And you can appreciate, and in the cognitive sense, you can clearly know dukkha through seeing it externally as well. So but how do you balance that when you are looking at dukkha externally, which can be depressing? I mean, watching the news, you really have to be upright. I mean, that's, for me, if I was to watch the news, it wouldn't be helpful for me to watch it like in an easy chair or basically on a sofa, because I would be, for me, my mindfulness of the body is not upright, is not established. So if I was going to watch the news, I would want to do it in an upright position, so that I could watch how my body is reacting, how my mind and body are reacting to all of this impingement, all of this extreme kind of fire hose of depressing news from around the world. So you need to know your limits. How much news can you take? How much reflection on other people's suffering? How much can you stay with your sick and dying relative before it becomes unhelpful, and before it becomes you just get burned out. Again, we've talked about this, Tanisbo and I, in previous podcasts, is the balance which the Buddha gives for two mental qualities called samvega, which is the appreciation of samsara. Again, the grok, you're seeing this is not a pretty place for most beings most of the time. This is, in the words of the sutta, this is, a place of mutual devouring. Specifically, is talking about the animal realm, but certainly there are certain human realms that are places of mutual devouring as well. And that's when we practice samvega, which is this sense of world weariness, with regards to samsara. But to balance that samvega is a sense of pasada, is clear confidence that, samsara is not a pretty place everywhere. And even in the most beautiful places, it's going to change. These deva realms, I think for most people listening to this podcast, myself included, to some extent, we're living in realms of pleasure, which, the most wealthy people, the kings of previous generations, could never have known. But still, these pleasures will end, and that will be unpleasant for us. Balance the acknowledgement of suffering with this sense of clear confidence that there is a way out. There is a way out. And again, this is an article of faith. We can't know. Maybe you've seen people who you think might be enlightened, or at least read about them, the Buddha, his disciples. Maybe it's possible. And again, this is an article of faith. Maybe it is possible. And you take that as your ground that, there is an escape. And that can give you a foothold that not only is there escape, but the Buddha gave us a path out, or a path to understand it, a path to be unmoved in a moving world, a path to not suffer in a world that's suffering. And from that place, we can be of maximum benefit to anyone who we interact with. So, yeah, not moving and unmoved in a totally turbulent world. So that's how we can help the world through our own practice. So maybe leave the questions at that. Appreciation for everyone who did post questions and everyone who's watched this. It's great to see people. Maybe one last question, because it's a beautiful question. Which monastics have you come into contact with that have impressed you most, and why? Yeah, I have met impressive lay people on a spiritual level. The question is about monastics. Lumpur Liam, the current abbot of Ajahn Chah's monastery, Wat Nong Papong, is a very impressive monk. Almost his sense of restraint is just almost otherworldly. You look at him and he looks radiant. He looks radiant, but he's almost just not interested in anything. Somehow he's got the radiance which charismatic people of any kind of persuasion, any religion, any spirituality, can have this, or self-help gurus or politicians or whatever it is, whatever it is, can have this charisma and this brightness. But he's got that, but it's not because he's going out and trying to grab people and pull them into his story and kind of impress them with his beauty. You get a very palpable sense that he's not trying to grab you in. He's totally content inwardly, is the impression. And yet he's just vibrant. He's got this just aura about him I don't see auras on a very spiritual level, but one practice-based thing which I appreciate about him is that when I have lived near him or gone to visit him, basically my own mindfulness kind of peaks. I get within 10 feet of him, I see him, and then I get 10 feet within his radius, and I myself start wanting to be and feeling more mindful. My meditation object will become more clear in my mind. So yeah, that's how I can gauge it. Again, I don't have the ability to know another person's mind, but he's a very impressive monk. So I hope everyone has the ability or the good fortune to meet people like Lumpur Liam in your life, because then you start having faith, like, it seems like they've taken their practice to another level, and maybe I can as well. So, all right. Thanks, everybody. Wish you all a good rest of your Saturday, and take care.